This is paradise. Would you like to holiday in Darjeeling? Who on earth wouldn't want to? Spread in ribbons over a steep mountain ridge surrounded by green tea plantations, Darjeeling is the perfect hill station for a holiday. There was a time when India did not have any idea about tea, but today everybody begins their day with tea. So, how did India get its chai? So much so that even our political discussions are called chai pe charcha. Well, it was the British East India Company that promoted tea plantations for its market by destroying villages and hills and people's livelihood in India. Let us learn about it and other aspects about British rule in our chapter Ruling the Countryside. In our last chapter, we have seen how the British came to India for trade and how they eventually controlled India after the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar. On 12th August 1765, the Mughal Emperor appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. But the major interest of the company was trade, and they used the Diwani to meet their growing expenses. Before 1765, the company imported gold and silver from Britain to purchase goods such as fine cotton and silk cloth, but now the revenue collected from Bengal could finance the British purchase of goods for export. The Indian artisans soon began deserting the villages since they were forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Peasants were unable to pay the dues that were demanded from them and left the villages with all their belongings. The production by Indian artisans was decreasing, and not many peasants continued with the cultivation of crops since they had to pay high taxes to the British. Then in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. Land revenue was the major source of income for the British administration in India, and if the peasants gave up cultivating, from where would they get revenue for company trade? Most of the company officials agreed that agricultural activities have to be supported, not really to feed the people, but to feed their industries. Thus, the British came up with some initiatives in investment in land. The three principal methods of revenue collection were the permanent settlement, the Ryotwari system, and the Mahalwari system. The permanent settlement was introduced in 1793 by Lord Cornwallis, the Ryotwari system introduced in 1820 by Captain Alexander Reed and Thomas Munro, and the Mahalwari system introduced in 1822 by Holt Mackenzie. In 1793, Governor-General Lord Cornwallis introduced the permanent settlement system. Under this system, the zamindars were treated as owners of the land as long as they paid land revenue on time. The British needed persons who commanded respect in the society to collect revenue, so they made Rajas and Talukdars as zamindars. The zamindar had to collect the taxes from peasants and pay revenue to the company. This amount of land revenue was not to be increased ever in the future. It was fixed permanently. Therefore, it was called permanent settlement. However, the revenue fixed was so high that zamindars found it difficult to pay. Hence, they did not invest in improving the land. Anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. But the situation changed by the first decade of the 19th century as the price or rate of agricultural produce increased. Cultivation began to expand. As a result, the income of the zamindars increased, but the British company could not profit from that as the amount of revenue to be paid was fixed permanently. Besides, Zamindars did not have any interest in improving the land, as some of them had lost their lands earlier and realized they could earn profit without improving the land. The peasants who were cultivating the land found the system very oppressive. Since the rent for the field charged by the zamindar was very high, he had to often take a loan from the moneylender, and when he failed to pay the rent, he was removed from the land he had cultivated for so many years. This is the sad reality of farmers even up to this day. This newspaper clip provides chilling figures of Maharashtra alone. Do you know how many farmers die across India every single year? Coming back to the topic of permanent settlement, the zamindars faced the insecurity of losing their land, the farmers had the fear of losing the land, and the British did not want to lose the profit margin. So the British came up with a new system of land revenue. In 1822, Holt Mackenzie introduced a new system called Mahalwari settlement in the northwestern part of the Bengal province. Under this system, the district collectors went to every village to inspect and measure the land under cultivation and to estimate how much revenue should be charged. This revenue was to be collected by the head of the village and not by the zamindar. Another system of land revenue that was practiced in southern India, replacing the permanent settlement, was the Ryotwari system, also known as the Munro system. They argued that there were no traditional zamindars and that the settlement had to be made directly with the ryots or cultivators. Their fields were carefully surveyed and revenue assessments were made. None of the land revenue systems were beneficial for the peasants. The British wanted to increase the income from the land and thus demanded a very high revenue. Unable to pay, peasants fled the countryside and villages became deserted regions. The British traders soon devised another plan. They believed that the land that gave them revenue could be used to provide crops that Europe required. They tried best to expand the cultivation of commercial crops like opium and indigo. Today, opium cultivation requires government license, but illegally crops are still grown. This picture provides how much crop is destroyed. This is another headline about India's opium, and it says that during this lockdown they are facing trouble. The only party they can sell their opium to is the government's narcotics department, a mandatory requirement under the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. Regarding other commercial crops, jute cultivation was started in the regions of Bengal. Tea for Europe was grown in Assam. Sugarcane plantations were started in Uttar Pradesh. Wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra and rice in Madras, that's today's Tamil Nadu region. Let us now focus on the commercial crop called indigo. The blue color that you see in this print was produced from a plant called indigo. Cloth manufacturers in Italy, France and England preferred indigo as a dye because it produced rich blue color. The other dye from plant wood was pale and dull. The French started cultivating indigo in Saint-Domingue in the Caribbean islands. Faced with increasing demand for indigo, the company expanded indigo cultivation in India. The two systems of indigo cultivation were Nij and Ryoti. Under Nij, company officials bought land on lease for cultivation of indigo, whereas under the Ryoti system, they forced the farmers to sign a contract with the company to cultivate indigo and also provided loans to them. However, the price that the farmer got for indigo was very low, and the farmer couldn't use the same land again to grow rice as the soil lost its fertility. Facing acute hardships and oppression from the planters, the peasants came to the conclusion enough is enough. In March 1859, ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo, refused to pay rent to the company officials, and attacked indigo factories armed with swords, spears, bows, and arrows. They also received support from zamindars and the village headmen who were dissatisfied with the British. This 1859 Indigo Rebellion was just 2 years after the famous 1857 revolt, and thus the British were worried and they tried to pacify the ryots. They also brought military to protect British indigo planters from being attacked. A commission was set up to start an inquiry into the indigo revolt and found that the British planters were at fault. It also declared that no ryot would be forced to produce indigo in the future. As a result, indigo plantations stopped in Bengal, but the British planters shifted their operations to Bihar. In 1917, a Bihari peasant requested Mahatma Gandhi to visit Champaran and see the plight of indigo cultivators there. This marked the beginning of Champaran movement. That brings our chapter to a close. Thank you very much.